Do you like scary movies? I don't mean gory horror films. I'm not a big fan of horror. But I do like a film that keeps you on edge, that makes you jump. Films like The Village, or Signs, or The Sixth Sense. There's always that classic scene in films like this where people make silly decisions. The bad guy's in the house, so they run upstairs. Or they go for a walk in the woods on their own. The thing that makes these films scary, that sets you on edge, is you don't know what's going to happen. It's all still, but you know something's up, because the eerie music starts to play. The mist starts to roll in. The character gets all flustered and worried, like they know someone is watching them. And then, bang! A cat jumps out of them. You jump off your seat, you knock over your popcorn, and you spill your drink everywhere. It's not what's seen, but what's unseen that makes these films scary. It's the unexpected, the anticipation. We don't know what's going to happen, but we know something is going to happen. It makes for a great film, but it's not so good when it's life. The reality we're all facing is that life is full of unknowns. We know something's happening, but we're not totally sure what is going to happen. We don't know the impact that this will have on ourselves, our families, our friends, our communities. There's a famous story in the Gospels about the disciples, how they were afraid, how they were anxious. Matthew records it for us. You can read it in his Gospel in chapter 14. You see, Jesus had just miraculously fed 5,000 people through his disciples with just a bunch of tuna sandwiches. He's tired, it's late at night, and he sends his disciples ahead of him in the boat across the Sea of Galilee back home to Capernaum. He's staying where he is and he's going to catch them up later on. Perhaps they think he's going to catch an Uber or something like that. Anyway, the disciples set out. It's the middle of the night and they're in the middle of the sea and a storm kicks up. That's not uncommon for that part of the world. They were fishermen, they lived on the boat, they were used to storms. But this storm was a bit big and they were a bit afraid. And as they're dealing with all of that stuff, suddenly they look out across the sea and they see this figure standing on the water. If it was a film, that's where the Philharmonic Orchestra would kick in. You know, the mist would all come in and through the mist they'd see this character standing on the waves, standing on the sea. And they're terrified, they think it's a ghost. Jesus calls out to them and says, "Don't be afraid, it's me." And then Peter does something absolutely amazing. He looks at Jesus and he says to him, "Lord, if it's you, call me to come to you on the water." Now this is a big deal. They're in the middle of a storm and Peter's thinking about getting out of the boat and walking on water. What most of us don't realise is that Peter couldn't swim. Nobody could. Swimming was not a pastime back then. So Peter calls to Jesus and says, "Lord, if it's you, call me to come to you on the water." And Jesus simply says, "Come." And Peter steps out of the boat and he starts to walk on the water. And everything is going really well. But the wind is buffeting him, the waves are high, and Peter's attention shifts from Jesus and it shifts to the wind and it shifts to the waves. And all of a sudden, he begins to sink. And he cries out, "Lord, save me." And Jesus reaches out his hand and he takes hold of Peter and he grabs him. And they get back into the boat and Jesus says to him, "You have little faith. Why did you doubt?" And I think that comes across as a little bit harsh. It can seem that Jesus is having a go at Peter, that he's telling him off. But I don't think that's what's happening. I think Jesus is saying, you were so close. You know, you got out of the boat, you'd walked there, you were within reaching distance of me. Why did you take your attention off me at that last moment? Why did you start worrying about the waves and start worrying about the wind? Why did you take your eyes off me? You were so close. Life might feel like you're in the middle of the sea, in the middle of the night, in the middle of the storm. Just as you're coping with all of these challenges, something new comes along. You see, Peter wasn't afraid when he noticed the wind and he noticed the waves. Peter was terrified right from the beginning. He was afraid of the storm. He was terrified when Jesus turned up. He was terrified as he stepped out of that boat and started to walk on water. You see, it's okay to be afraid. It's okay to be anxious. It's okay to be worried. We sometimes think that to have faith means we shouldn't have those things. That's not the case. No, faith is a willingness to step out of the boat even though we're afraid, even though we're anxious, even though we're filled with worry. Faith in God is in the absence of fear. It's a willingness to trust in God despite what the world is throwing at us. We don't know what's happening to us. We don't know the circumstances. We don't know how things are going to unfold. Faith in times like these is saying to God, I'm not okay with this. I'm not happy with this. I'm worried about these things. But I'm choosing to not allow my fear, my anxiety, my worry control me. I'm choosing to put my trust in you. I'm choosing to keep my hope in you. Matthew records something earlier on that Jesus said about worry. You can find it in chapter 6. It's titled, "Do Not Worry." Right at the bottom of the chapter, the very last verse, Jesus says this. He says, "Therefore, do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble on its own." We don't know what tomorrow will bring. What we're called to do is to focus on today, to get through today. So do that. Don't worry about tomorrow. Focus on today. Focus on getting yourself through today, on getting your family, your friends, your neighbours through today.